Hey everybody, welcome back. And this is going to be the loops unit. And we'll start with an introduction to loops. So, we know about data types, we know about functions that can use those data types. We've applied several different operators and methods, and we've also introduced the idea of a conditional, doing something based on some kind of a condition. Now, the next fundamental concept we're going to introduce is the idea of looping. You'll also hear people refer to it as iteration. So here's some code, bunch of console.log statements. We'll take it over to our REPL and we'll run it, and we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So pretty simple. But you figure that this is kind of inefficient to write the same thing over and over again like that. And it's not really that big of a deal when you have 5 lines, but let's consider that we had like a database of users and some incredible number, not incredible, but some, tens of thousands of items. And you wouldn't want to have to write tens of thousands of lines of code to do something when programming, specifically JavaScript in this case, lets us decide to do something over and over again with relative ease, and that's actually something that almost all of them are capable of. So here's a quick example of a loop that's going to do the exact same thing as this. Now don't worry too much about I is undefined. Yep, sure is. So sorry about that. So there we go. Don't worry too much about the syntax of this. We'll go into the syntax of it. It's not that important to know exactly how this is operating, just to consider that, let's say that we had to do this, log all the numbers. This is 1 through 5, but let's say we wanted to do like, 25. It becomes much easier than having to write 25 console.log statements. Instead, we're just going to write a loop that does something 25 times. Exactly how it does that we'll get into in the upcoming lessons, but this is the concept. Doing something over and over again, because picture if we have an array, we want to do something to everything in that array. There's a bulletproof example. So, iteration versus loops. So from Stack Overflow, iteration is the number of times a loop can be executed, which might confuse you, because it confused me. But the idea that you want to consider at this point in your coding journey is that iteration and loops are basically interchangeable. When we say I'm going to iterate over the array, or I'm going to loop over the array, we mean the exact same thing. The last concept to touch on before we get into some specifics is infinite loops. So an infinite loop happens when you don't define properly a stopping condition. We'll go into what a stop condition is, but essentially it's this part where it says num is less than or equal to 5. It basically says when the loop should stop running. So the problem becomes that if you tell a loop to start running, but you forget to tell it to stop, or if you, more likely, incorrectly tell it how to stop, meaning that it doesn't stop, it'll go for an infinite loop, meaning that it'll just keep going and going and going and going and going. And usually what happens is that if you just quit your window or your browser and come back in, it'll be fine. But it will freeze and it will look as though everything is going calamitously wrong, but it's not. And it happens to almost everybody at the beginning of their coding journey. So if it does, maybe mention in Slack, be like, hey, I got my infinite loop. So yeah, no big deal. The next lesson we're going to be talking about while loops. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.